Okay, so let's talk about something a little bit weird. Scriptural authorization, the creation of talismans, charms, that kind of thing, using promises, statements made by powerful deities. Scriptural authorization. Strange term, not my term. I liken it a lot to case law. Definition of case law from a legal perspective. Essentially, it is rulings that have been made by judges and tribunals before, in cases similar, that a lawyer would then take to use to argue your case, because you can't kind of overrule what a decision a judge has already made, essentially. So the equivalent is, this decision's already been made in this case, therefore it is the same in my case. Scriptural authorization is when you include into magical practice promises, things like that a spirit deity, that kind of thing, has done, has made, pacts that are similar to your situation. So what you will find with a lot in ceremonial magic, when you look at sigils and talismans and things like that, you'll sometimes find like Latin writing stuff around the outside. A lot of these sorts of things are Christian, therefore they come from the Bible, because they come from Christian, Yahweh, whatever you would say, Jehovah, Christian God, Christian magic. You're essentially taking little snippets from the Bible in Latin, and you're using those snippets, ones that are relevant to your case. So if I give you an example of how you would include that. So if we look at this Bible here. So opening this up into Genesis chapter 9, what you will find essentially is a promise. If I can find it here. And I behold, I establish my covenant, you with your seed and after you, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, and of every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth. I will establish my covenant with you, and neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the water of a flood. Neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. So if you remember your Old Testament, if you remember Genesis and you remember the flood, essentially Yahweh promises that there will be no more flooding of the earth, and that is in Christian mythology, if we call it mythology without offending anyone. That's where we get the idea of the rainbow. Okay, so when encountering heavy rainfall and a flood, this is essentially a promise that has been made that literally, I will establish my covenant with you, and neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood. So if you had heavy flooding, what you may decide to do, if you're using scriptural authorization and you are a Christian magician, Christian witch, utilizing essentially this energy force, what you would do is create a talisman or a charm that is based on this statement, based on this promise. So let's go ahead and actually do that. So just to recap again, scriptural authorization. A powerful deity doesn't need to be a Christian one. I'm using a kind of Christian Cunning Folk style practice of doing this. However, you know, if you have a deity or something like that you work with, say you had say you worked with the Greek pantheon and you wanted to utilize a deity from the Greek pantheon, Zeus or Hermes or whoever it is, what you would do is you would find a situation whereby in scripture, literary, you would be able to find a story or a piece of information, part of a story essentially, that says, well, this deity stepped in and helped this person in this situation. This person's situation is similar to mine, so therefore, because you've helped them, you should help me. essentially with this is a promise made by a specific spirit. So, for example, because this spirit, Yahweh, has specifically stated a promise that it will not allow flooding to affect, essentially, if I read it again, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood. So people should not be separated by the waters of a flood. Neither there shall be any more be a flood to destroy the earth. Destructive flooding, essentially, a promise made by this spirit. I'm not going to allow that. Therefore, you utilizing and tapping into that energy in the form of talismans or charms, that kind of thing, to get that deity spirit's attention or to take energy from that to prevent a flood, that is what we're talking about. Scriptural authorization because it's a scripture, so it's written, essentially. Authorization because the authority to stop this is coming from this particular spirit. Again, you don't need to use the Bible. Traditionally, in ceremonial magic and things like that, when you're creating talismans, and you see these in old grimoires and stuff like that, and they're written in Latin, and you translate them, and they do end up being quotes essentially from the Bible or references to biblical text. The reason for this is because that's Christianized magic, Christian magic, therefore it relies heavily on the Bible. The older it is, the chances are the Bible would have been written in Latin. Therefore, it stands to reason the people that were making these talismans would have done them in Latin. You would see this in a lot of cunning folk practices. You look at seals and things like that when it comes to the things that the cunning folk use. They won't necessarily understand because many cunning folk weren't literate, couldn't read and write. But there is power there. So the power and the way in which this works on is the tapping into an energy force, plus whatever the practitioner themselves can muster up. So not only have you got the fact that this represents a magically binding contract, essentially, because in here there is a magically binding contract. You can open up your own. Have a little look in the Bible. There's a contract with this spirit. But also the fact that you're putting your oomph into it, in the fact that you are, as they say, the Wiccans like to say nowadays, it's all about the intention. Well, I shouldn't say Wiccans, but you know what I mean. Modern witches say it's all about the intention. You putting that into it, but then also the fact that some of these charms and these precedences, I suppose, have been utilized over and over and over and over and over again. They've been incorporated into lots of seals and talismans and sigils and things like that over and over and over and over again. So there's a certain amount of power there. Again, scriptural authorization, taking a promise. This is a promise or a covenant, essentially, in this case. Doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be literally you finding something that a spirit has helped someone in the past accomplish, and although you're not that person, because that spirit has done that for that other person or for that people, you're borrowing that energy. You're essentially almost like a petition to a certain extent. So there's two real things going on here. This isn't so much a petition. This is you essentially triggering a clause in a contract when it comes to this. If you're going to be going by a tale, or whether it's a folklore piece or something like that, then you're basically saying, you know, I'm pulling on this tale, I'm pulling on the fact that this you spirit has helped this person before, please can you help me, bring your energy into me. Two different things. One is a petition, one is a contract, essentially. So when it comes to this contract, how would you turn that into kind of like a charm? So a simple one would be the very fact that we're dealing with the story of the Bible, so we're going to do a biblical charm. With this story, obviously, if you know, that is kind of the idea of where the rainbow came about. So in the Bible, it's stated that in Genesis, after the big flood, God removed the flood, and then there was a rainbow putting the sky every time it kind of rains. or every time the conditions are similar to the flood, as a sign, a legally binding contract or covenant, as you were with humans and Yahweh, quote unquote God, and that is the sign symbol. So in terms of putting that on there, we'll probably make a rainbow. So if I was to literally just do something like that, because I'm not very good at drawing, my drawing is absolutely terrible, I'm just going to utilize black paper with gold pen, and then I'm going to go Gen 9, 11. There we go. Gen 9, 11. 4. Genesis 9, verse 11. And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood, neither shall there be any waters of the flood. To invoke and to utilize this is my personal, which I've made up on the spot, as you can see, not the best piece of art, my little charm for stopping floods. Feel free to use this if you want to use this. Alternatively, what you could do from a perspective of I wouldn't like to say incantation, essentially an incantation, so a spoken charm, is to read that passage over and over again. So to go and stand outside or to look outside of the window when you're seeing all this heavy rain pour that seems to be washing away your neighbour's shed, you would obviously look at the sky and invoke that energy. Now when it comes to invocation and evocation, that's going on to slightly different topics, but what I wanted to do is pick up on this because I don't think it's something that gets discussed all that much. When it comes to how magic works, there are many ways in which different types of magic work. It doesn't all work exactly the same. This is something that comes up a fair amount if you reverse engineer certain things, particularly the sorts of things that you find in old journals and grimoires. When it comes to cunning folk practices, you'll find many books on cunning folk practices nowadays with all these little charms and things like that written in them, things that you say, things that you do, and then little symbols and seals and things. Don't understand how they work because the author doesn't explain. Whether the author knows and they just don't want to put in, I don't know. But this is one such way that they do work, some of them. You'll find a lot of folk magicians, folk witches, people that practice kind of folk magic nowadays. And back in the day, cunning folk, they'd use these and they'd be seen to work, but in terms of, well, how is it actually working? Not something that's discussed. So we've kind of touched on a little subject here today. If you want to find out some more information on this kind of thing, then by all means do your own research. But it would be interesting if we could go into some of these signs and sigils and things that loads of people use, like abracadabra. You know, we did a video on abracadabra, but how does it actually work? You know, it's a very good a book mentioning, well, in this situation, you do this. Well, how does that work? I don't know, just do it, it works. You know, it's one of those things that I think we should go into a little bit more. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. I don't even know if that made sense to me thinking about it, but hopefully we've got a video out of this. If there's a half decent video I can cobble together out of all the random crap I just said, I will put it on the Thoth TV YouTube channel. And as ever, it would be really helpful for us if you could like and hit the subscribe button, because I never ever say that and I get told off for not saying that. So there we go. Thanks for listening and watching, and remember to press the like and subscribe button.